Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette and our series on eyeglasses. In today's video, we'll give you a brief history of eyeglasses, we'll discuss the anatomy and construction of eyeglasses, and we'll talk about different frames and what they say about you. If you have watched this channel for a while, you know that I've never worn eyeglasses, and frankly, I just wore them for this video. However, I know someone who has a long history of wearing eyeglasses, and he's also a new addition to our team. Welcome with me, Preston Schlieder, to the Gentleman's Gazette.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So Preston, you're a jazz singer. You like 30s style and classic men's style. For how long have you been wearing glasses?
I've worn glasses since I was 3 years old, so it's been quite a long time.
All right. And what's the style you're wearing right now?
Well, these are basically a classic round frame in a tortoiseshell color with a keyhole bridge. And if that doesn't make sense to you right now, we'll cover those terms later in the video.
Yeah. So with that being said, Preston is the expert. I'm not, so I'm heading out and he's taking over. See you later.
All right, so let's get to it. Part 1 of the eyeglasses video. In the first part of this video, we're just going to cover a brief history of eyeglasses and how long they've been around. The first mention of eyeglasses as we know them today, which is to say two-lens corrective frames, comes all the way back from the 13th century in Italy. With this said, however, it's also true that other cultures around the world had been experimenting with similar kinds of ideas. It wouldn't have been perfected until this point in the 13th century, however. For example, there's an Arabic text from the 11th century called the Book of Optics, which essentially laid the foundation for modern eyeglasses, but again, it wouldn't be for another 100 years that we would really see something resembling the first modern pair. Bifocals, which are lenses with two optical powers, date to roughly the 1760s. They may have been invented by Benjamin Franklin, but we're not absolutely sure about that. What is known is that he definitely had a hand in creating them. A short time later, in the early 1800s, a British astronomer named George Airy created lenses that can correct astigmatism, which is a fancy word for blurred vision. Handheld glasses, or lorgnette, were the first style to be used, followed later by pince-nez, or glasses that were secured just on the bridge of the nose. Of course, we also have to mention the monocle, which was popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. That's a single lens held in the orbit of the eye, and it was popular among the upper classes in that time period. By the late 1920s, glasses with temples, or arms fitting over the ears, became the dominant style. Well into the 20th century, eyeglasses were still considered primarily a medical appliance and weren't designed with fashion in mind. But by the 1970s, designers caught on that there could be a market in designer eyewear, and since then, we've seen all kinds of different fashion-forward frames abound. So, what does that mean for eyeglasses today? Basically, they're no longer an accessory to hide, but instead they're a stylish accent that you can use to complement your wardrobe or accent your own personal style in general. So, what's to love about eyeglasses today? First of all, they're optional. Since they're no longer the only way you can correct your vision, we've got contacts and laser corrective surgery, you can wear them as often or as seldom as you like. Another big plus is that glasses today are much more affordable, especially now that online retailers have gotten into the game and will send you multiple pairs to try on at home for a relatively low price. It's easier than ever to find frames that you're going to love. Furthermore, retailers these days are offering a wide range of materials other than just plastic or metal, so you can definitely find something that will suit you. Finally, it must be said that glasses make you look smart. It's not just a stereotype, it's actually been scientifically proven. Also, glasses can add maturity to youthful faces and youth to mature faces. If you find the right pair, they'll do what you need them to. So now, let's get into the basic anatomy of what makes eyeglasses eyeglasses. As you might well imagine, they're constructed of several different parts that work together. Most pairs typically consist of a pair of rims, which secure the lenses, a bridge, which connects the rims, and temples, which extend over the ears. Depending on the style of glasses, other details may also exist, including nose pads, temple tips, or a brow bar across the top, but we'll get into those details later. First, let's talk about the various construction materials that can be used to make eyeglasses, starting with plastic. Cellulose acetate is a plastic polymer that's made from wood pulp and then molded into sheets. Individual frames are then cut from these sheets and hand polished. This is a little bit more labor-intensive than using simple extruded plastic, so that's where a little bit of the extra cost comes from. As a plus, acetate is stiffer, heavier, and more durable than standard plastic, so that's why it's a good choice for eyeglasses. Multicolored patterns such as tortoiseshell are far more beautiful in acetate, since the pattern was created over an entire sheet. If it were extruded plastic, that pattern would have to be painted on, which generally doesn't look as nice. There are a few disadvantages to acetate eyeglasses. In general, they're harder to adjust than metal and they can be a little bit heavier. They're also slightly more prone to snapping. Overall, because of its beauty and durability, we would definitely recommend acetate as a choice for your eyeglasses. Next up, let's talk about a lightweight, easily adjustable construction material, metal. Often you'll see glasses constructed from titanium, aluminum, or various alloys. They're typically corrosion resistant, which is a good thing if they're going to be sitting on faces that might sweat. Metal is particularly well suited to thinner frames, especially in round or rectangular shapes. At the same time, there are a few disadvantages to metal frames too. First of all, they can be easily bent or misshapen, and because metal often has a strong memory, they can't necessarily be reformed to exactly the way they were before if the bending was severe. There are people out there with metal allergies, and they may run the risk of reacting to metal eyeglass frames as well. Finally, coated metal frames can also lose their finish over time, which will cause them to age faster than plastic frames. Lastly here, let's talk about natural frames. Though they're a bit harder to find and generally more expensive, you are still able to find natural frames in such materials as wood, bone, or shell. Wooden frames are a more recent trend, and they're constructed similarly to plastic frames for the most part. They're typically made from hardwood and then finished with a more precious wood on top. Horn is another option, often from a buffalo or a deer. They're usually hand-carved and then polished, and because of their striations and matte finish, they end up being a really elegant choice. Tortoise shell is largely illegal these days. Any shell that was harvested after 1973 is not allowed to be sold. But if you're particularly determined, you could probably find a pair at a vintage retailer. Be warned, however, they are fairly expensive because they're so rare. Overall, natural materials can be a distinctive choice, but they require a little bit more effort and maintenance on the wearer's part, so metal and plastic might be easier choices to go with, at least at first. Next, let's talk about some recommended styles of eyeglasses. Fortunately for the stylish gent, there are many types of classic frames that are currently back in fashion. Note that there are many variations on all of these styles, so if you don't think that some of the samples we're going to show today would necessarily suit you, there's a retailer out there that will probably have a slight variation on what we're showing that might fit you a little bit better. First, let's talk about brow line glasses, which are defined by a top-heavy, strong frame along the brow line and across the temples. The frame is completed along the bottom by thin metal wires, which have the general effect of drawing the eye upwards towards the more defined part at the top. This style is particularly evocative of the 1950s and 1960s, when it was worn by notable figures including Malcolm X or President Lyndon B. Johnson. This style is particularly good at adding maturity to youthful faces, but if you are an older gentleman, be careful with the type of brow line frames you choose because they can risk looking a little bit dated. Brow line glasses are great for creative people or those who are simply looking to blend a bold statement with a more classic style of frame. Round metal frames have typically been the choice for counterculture, youth culture, and other sorts of resistance movements, and in the last few years we've started to see them re-enter the mainstream again. Favored by people including Steve Jobs, Gandhi, and John Lennon, they're a choice for somebody who feels that they are just a little bit outside of the mainstream. Overall, round metal frames are great for people who are creative and a little bit quirky. Unlike round metal frames, round plastic frames with a keyhole bridge are the epitome of stylish, mainstream menswear. These frames can add maturity to youthful faces, but unlike brow line glasses, they also work perfectly well on seasoned gentlemen too. For example, my own glasses happen to be in this style, with a little bit of squaring across the top and just a suggestion of a keyhole bridge. So they're a little bit more modern, but definitely still in this mold. Finally, in this section, let's talk about rectangular frames, which can make a variety of statements. Long, thin frames are more simple and pedestrian, while thick rectangles in darker shades make a bold statement for a man of any age. This style is particularly good at adding youth to more mature faces, particularly if you opt for a bolder color such as dark blue, clear, or tortoiseshell. Next, let's talk about how to find the right eyeglasses for you, since finding a pair that suits your own personal style, skin tone, and face shape can require a little bit of trial and error. We've done some previous videos on how to find the right pairs of sunglasses for your skin tone and your face shape, which you can check out here. And luckily, they cover much of the same territory, but we'll still discuss a few of the key points here. The biggest difference between eyeglasses and sunglasses is that most men are typically wearing sunglasses for only a brief stretch of time. On the other hand, you could be wearing eyeglasses as often as all day, every day, so you want to make sure that you're choosing the right pair for you. So, stay tuned for part 2 of our eyeglasses guide, which will discuss in depth how to pick the right frames for your face shape and skin tone, and also the best ways to shop for glasses. To wrap up today's video, glasses are now treated more like fashion items than the medical appliances they once were. They strike a unique balance between fashion and function, and they can often be a great visual shorthand for a wearer's personality. So, if you wear glasses, what kind do you wear? And more importantly, how do you pair them with your outfits? Share with us in the comments below. In today's video, I'm wearing a vintage camel hair jacket and a green shirt from Charles Tyrwhitt. The tie, from Fort Belvedere, is silk and features a houndstooth pattern in pearl gray and bottle green. Also from Fort Belvedere are the cufflinks, which are gold-plated sterling silver. They're an eagle claw design, and they feature tiger's eye as the stone. Furthermore, the boutonniere is an edelweiss, also available from Fort Belvedere. I'm wearing an English silk pocket square. The green echoes green elsewhere in the outfit, and its primary color, which is a burnt orange, ties in with the various shades of brown that I'm wearing. My trousers are plain brown, my socks are green and feature a zigzag pattern, and my shoes are tan derbies which feature full broguing. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another one of our videos.